Yes.
Okay. Do I have consent to record?
I'm sorry?
Do I have consent to record?
Yeah, sure. I'm recording too. I will send you the file as soon as
Thank you.
possible.
Okay, so where is it? There it is. So most people will not disagree with the idea that they themselves have the correct way to look at the world. How does EOF kind of as a project, as a set of tools, help them kind of change that potential misperception where they do likely have at least some misperceptions about the world, misconceptions about the world.
I would say this is a very delicate point because we want to be right, especially when a viewpoint has been stuck in our head for a very long time, especially years. What I'm saying is a very delicate approach because I don't think we can. In most cases, we cannot really approach people directly. I think it doesn't work. I also think that this is probably the main reason why showing people facts and evidence, especially when their belief is very much ingrained, doesn't really quite work because they eventually will apply a confirmation bias modality of thinking and like trying to justify their belief in another way, in another modality. Um, so what I have a funny term for this approach. I call it circumnavigation, which is pretty much like a process of going around, trying to place doubts, question marks, and fundamentally, we don't want people to think the way we think. We want people to think in a way capable to find out for themselves and being as objective as possible. I would say we plant the seeds. For instance, I think a very good and simple approach is to ask people what you mean by that. When people talk about their beliefs, they are usually quite fast, lexically, verbally, cognitively speaking. I think it is wise to stop them when it's possible, of course, and really to ask them, wait a second, what you mean by that, what you actually mean by that. Let me give you an example. For instance, when people, okay, let's say something like this. A typical situation when someone faces the loss of a loved one, usually people around, what do they say? They approach the person saying rhetorical sentences like, this person is now in a better world, is doing a better life. With all due respect, but I will ask, wait, what do you mean by that? You just don't know that. Another example, when people say, which is actually, by the way, something that happened to me a few times, several times, talking about enlightenment, some people say, but Buddha achieved the enlightenment. My approach would be, wait a minute, nobody met the Buddha. Probably the Buddha is an invented figure. The scriptures about the Buddha have been written between 500 and 800 years after the supposed existence of the Buddha. So we just don't know, and not knowing is not a disturbing starting point of analysis. It's actually a beautiful starting point of analysis. So in a very superficial way, this is the approach we have.
And you have met James Randi, so have I. was he in any way a personal hero in some way, or an inspiration for the work that you do?
Well, I will not use the word hero because I think hero. I know it's like just a way. It's just the language, but a hero implies an authority, and I don't think it's good to give authority to certain to any figures, because with the process of giving authority to something or someone also comes the process of eventually falling into some biases, and I believe it's a little bit a process of venerating, which I don't really quite like. I have a lot of admiration for James Randi, for sure. I personally I don't have heroes. I have people that I do admire. I think that he is an incredible person. I appreciate his passion despite his age to go on. He's almost 90 now, and also his somehow kindness to approach people that have different beliefs without trying to impose reason on them, but trying to make them reason. There is a large, an enormous difference between like imposing reason and making people reason. I really like the person. We had very interesting chats and conversations, but I think we are pretty much on the same lines, and obviously he has a total admiration for what he has done and what he's doing right now. But really, I will not really turn people into heroes, because they are, after all, they are people. They also have their fallacies. I really will avoid this process of giving authorities to certain figures, because also in science, this could be a little bit a problem, because people that are not scientists often tend to give too much authorities to something that is eventually not completely scientific, especially in the field of social science. There are many things, many theories that are exposed like scientific. They are not scientific at all. They are actually, there is a lot of mumbo jumbo, especially in the field of psychology. Unfortunately, and there is a lot of penetration of sort of new age ideas or psychobubbles coming from motivational ideas or this sort of stuff in the field of psychology. So I think that giving an authority to something or someone somehow distracts us from really evaluating what the theory is, what the person is, and so on.
And if you could take some of the ideas in social psychology in particular, as well as some of the new age ideas, what are some common fallacies between some of those ideas, between both camps, so to speak?
You mean between the new age ideas and what?
And between some of the psychobabble ideas that you might find in some of psychology, some of social psychology.
Oh well, on the contrary of religion at least has a structure. So a religious person is not really much. He or she doesn't have much freedom to create new theories or to approach religious ideas in a different way. So the person has to stick to the scriptures, and at least there is that form of structure. The modern spirituality or New Age has not really that sort of structure. There is a lot of freedom to even invent our own beliefs that maybe eventually go together with mainstream and New Age beliefs. So that's a little bit of the problem in New Age, because there is also something very dishonest that is taking place with the New Age movement. What they do up scientific concepts, even scientific theories, and they twist them in order to satisfy their theories or their beliefs. We often, for instance, in social media, we often see things like, social media, new age social media groups, pages. We often see things like scientific study says that we have some vibrational field, all this sort of stuff. So I think this is very dishonest, and unfortunately it goes unseen by the many, because the many really believe that, because they don't check the sources. And sources aside, they don't even evaluate the sound validity of the article or the claim. Also because our brain is wired to be gullible, and then also because they are more prone to believe that science really found that some new age concept is actually true. So I think it's very dishonest and it's very confusing somehow. It contributes to the amplification of credulity in people's mind, and I believe that unfortunately this is also the reason why new age thinking and theories are penetrating the field of psychotherapy and psychology, because there are many psychologists or psychotherapists that nevertheless are quite gullible people, so they don't evaluate the validity of certain claims, and eventually they believe that ideas about positive thinking affecting our health in a physical way are true. In psychology, actually, there is no evidence whatsoever so far that, for instance, stress causes physical problems. It sounds strange, but really there is no evidence of something like this so far. And also, psychological theory cannot really be tested in a lab. It's based on statistics, and so it can be highly fallacious. So I think that after all is everything goes back to the matter of education. We don't have an education based on critical thinking, critical analysis, and this is a big problem, especially today that we are facing an overload of information every day. We don't quite know how to filter it, how to approach that.
Where do you think people who hold the title of skeptic as almost a placeholder of personal kind of nobility, they look at it as I think, as you're noting in the prior interview, as a way to belong to a group. How do they deceive themselves into thinking that they are the skeptical general when some within the movement that would take the title of skeptic just aren't?
Well, this is I've been discussing about this point during my recent lecture I've done in Poland in the European Skeptic Congress. Since I was talking about memes, the problem is that skepticism can actually be a meme. By meme, I don't refer to internet memes. I refer to a meme is, for instance, a unit of culture, or it could be an idea, and the characteristic of a meme is that the meme doesn't care about self-analysis much, it only cares about replicating itself. So I think that I think there are many people that call themselves skeptics just because they feel somehow safe to belong to a certain community, But as a matter of fact, we are not skeptic at all, especially with their own ways of thinking or mind, including emotions. For instance, a person can define himself or herself as a skeptic person, but maybe the person is capable to struggle greatly because of irrational emotions, and the person doesn't question that. So I think it's easy to take shelter into a group, believing to be something, because it's something that somehow nourishes our identity, our sense of to belong to something, our even self-esteem. But personally, I came across many people that claim to be skeptics. They're not really skeptics at all. They believe in the most gullible things, perhaps. So again, I believe that this is again a problem of education. Then there are extreme skeptic people, which is not really quite healthy. Oops.
Cut out right at extremist skeptics.
Okay, so what do you recall about what it said?
As far as I recall, you were saying there were some people that I think that they might be called, you could call them extremist skeptics, which isn't quite healthy, or something like that.
Oh yeah. There are. Well, this is also this is also a problem in science because I also came across this kind of people that I have to say they are quite extreme, and it's a little bit like hilarious because I remember, for instance, recently I was talking about how easily we get conditioned by external influences and memes. And another person said, do you have scientific evidence for this? Can you prove it scientifically? Because if you cannot prove it scientifically, then you should not talk about that. Oh, wait a minute. I don't think I need scientific evidence to prove that we can get conditioned quite quickly. I think the evidence is right in front of us, and also historically speaking. So I think this extremism sometimes is not really about skepticism. It's not healthy in any sense. It's not healthy for science. It's not healthy regarding accurate processes of analysis, and it's not healthy for good thinking. It's just an obstacle. And I believe that somehow it derives from a personal sense of identity that has nothing to do with science. I mean, science, the beauty of science is that science has no authority. And if we mix it together with a personal sense of authority, because maybe a person thinks, I'm a scientist, so you're not a scientist, so you should not say something without providing evidence. So, this is a personal, it has nothing to do with science, it has to do with the way we use our mind. And science is science, scientists are people, and people have brains, and brains are fallacious. So even in that case, I will approach these people the same way. Wait, what do you mean by that? And then it depends. think I'm losing you again. Are you there? No.
On a prior point around psychobabble, so to speak. Am I audible?
Sorry?
Oh, am I audible?
Yeah.
Good, okay. Yeah, and that prior point was touching on the psychobabble within the psychological community, and so as a general point, but ones that have gone into the mainstream. They have been taken over by more or less kind of religious movements or aspects of kind of non-critical thinking have kind of taken a hold. So, for instance, I would point to Alcoholics Anonymous, for instance. They have a very wide reach. They impact many lives, especially those at vulnerable moments of levels of addiction to at least one substance. And I'm sure you're very well aware of the 12 steps and all the things that are implied within it.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. Do you see? How do you see a way out of that? Of kind of reversing the trend of those innovations into the mainstream, so to speak?
Well, as I said, I think that fundamentally is a matter of education, and I think it's very hard because when we move out, when we are at least willing to move out from a certain structure of thinking, a belief system, we are so prone to adopt, to summon, to invite, or to jump into another belief system, because that's the way we are wired, and also that's the way we've been educated. For instance, there are many former religious people, especially former Muslim, who say that when they were religious, they had no idea that there were alternatives, and not necessarily other beliefs. I think it's relatively easy to propose another belief to some people that are struggling with their life, or they are willing to drop their current belief. But in this way, we just jump from a program into another, so to be reprogrammed one more time. This is what, for instance, happens with most of the activities of the AA, Alcoholistic Anonymous. They invite people to embrace Jesus Christ. So psychologically speaking, they move from a condition into another condition. I think that the problem, as I said, is a matter of education. We are not trained to think critically. We are not trained to identify unhealthy means and to comprehend the premises behind them, the validity of the premises, and fundamentally we are not trained to evaluate, as I said, the validity of the premises behind the conclusions we stick to. We usually stick to a certain conclusion, and we don't really analyze what is behind. This is fundamentally the problem. Sometimes it's quite shocking because, for instance, people that believe in so-called spiritual awakening, they don't analyze the premises behind this claim at all, not even historically, because for thousands of years, plenty of people try to achieve a spiritual awakening. So, do we know any name, any of those people that really achieved a spiritual awakening, whatever that means? We know many people that claimed that, but it's easy to, I can claim myself that I achieved a spiritual awakening. It proves an absolute zero, and eventually turns me into a guru. So you see, is
It's selling an invisible product.
it's not, it's easy to say something, but bombastic claims really require bombastic elements to prove it. Nevertheless, people really believe that because it's very appealing, they get infatuated, and what is somehow shocking is that they don't even evaluate really the not only the premises but even the outcomes of it. Because okay, and what is going to happen after we had a spiritual awakening, or so-called enlightenment or bliss? Maybe what is the purpose of finding out and thinking, discovering after a spiritual awakening? It could be like a form of like eternal boredom, where nothing is relevant anymore in terms of discovering this, challenging that. I think that it really sounds like a complete disintegration of criticalness and questioning. You see, they don't. Usually, we don't evaluate the premises. We don't evaluate the eventual outcomes. We only stick to the conclusion. No matter how vague and nebulous the conclusion is. So I believe this is a problem of education. We have to keep in mind that since our brain is wired to be credulous, critical thinking is a natural form of thinking, not intended in a negative way, intended in a way that is harder to think critically. This is also another problem. It's easy to say we are critical thinkers, but we are actually not. It requires a lot of psychological energies to think critically, and as a matter of fact, there are many unbiased studies, university studies, that unfortunately show how the teaching of critical thinking really doesn't quite work among students, which to me it means that it must be somehow integrated with something else, integrated with metacognition, integrated with memetics, integrated with what I call metamemetic thinking. I like somehow a lot this metaphor that Richard Dawkins created, calling memes like viruses in the mind. I believe it's not only a metaphor, I believe it's actually true. A lot of dangerous memes really work like viruses in the mind, making a person act irrationally. Really does look like a mental virus. And since we have been capable to create biological antiviruses and antiviruses in computer science, what about creating true education, cognitive antiviruses? Is not only a metaphor or a philosophical approach. I think it can be done, and it could be incredibly productive for the future generation to come. Also, not to mention, could be how it could be very productive in terms of somehow reducing possible negative outcomes coming out of the impact between us and the onset of artificial intelligence in the future. Which is, by the way, also what I'm developing. I'm developing some programs for high school and university students and also teachers right now. I'm talking with other people. The programs are pretty much based in what I just proposed.
I think that's a good end to it. Thank you very much for your time today.
Okay, I will send you the file as soon as possible.
Thank you.